Mr. Mitch, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning from Bangkok, Thailand. So we're gonna start with your presentation first that you did it for us 2 days ago in session 7. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Once again, this is Mitch Cron of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. This is the 7th and final pre-recorded session being prepared by me at US EPA for the Trilateral Partnership Workshop, October 2025. I hope everyone's had a good week in Bangkok, and I hope to be able to be there live and online throughout the workshop, and hopefully that'll work out well. But in any event, today is October 22nd. I'm recording this last pre-recorded session in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. The fates kind of worked against me this time, but I hope that thus far it's been a good success, and you've been able to enjoy contaminated site management capacity building activities together, formed relationships amongst the regulatory personnel from Thailand Pollution Control Department, as well as the Taiwan Ministry of the Environment and their partners, as well as other organizations and personnel that are making this workshop a success. So above all, I hope things are going well. I'm talking to the future right now. This is it's an unusual experience. So this is my final pre-recorded session. This is session number 7. It focuses on removal action selection for the wind process site. There's not a lot of content here. A lot of this is going to be driven by small group conversations and workshop-wide conversations. And sort of a spoiler alert, towards the end of this pre-recorded session, we're going to work on, in small groups, updating our conceptual site model based upon the results of the site visits at wind process. In small groups, talking about stability, security, and exposure issues that were identified. And then finally, we'll have a workshop-wide discussion talking about what are what are the main stability, security, and exposure issues that were identified, and what are some practical next steps to seek to mitigate the threat posed by those conditions. Wind process is obviously a site we're using as an example. Wind process, no doubt, already has a significant regulatory team working on it. I'm sure there's folks from TPCD, as well as many other parts of the Thailand government, actively working on the wind process site. So wind process is a site we're using as an example to underscore some project management tools, such as a conceptual site model, and overall to focus on removal actions we take to increase stability, increase security, and decrease exposure at contaminated sites. So moving forward, we all recall this is kind of going back, the president, going way statute to the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act statute, the piece of the law passed by the legislative branch of the U.S. federal government, and of course signed by the president. The president has the authority to do things when there's 3 conditions present. When there's been a release of a hazardous substance into the environment, the president has the authority to act. He or she can do things to protect public health, to protect the environment. And we talked earlier during the very first pre-recorded session about different options the president has. We talked about enforcement, we talked about remedial action, but naturally this particular workshop focuses from the US EPA perspective on removal action, sort of short-term, relatively low-cost activities that can be performed to, of course, increase stability, increase security, and decrease exposure to hazardous substances. And earlier in the week, we talked about the idea that the president can act to address a threat, to mitigate a threat to human health. And we also underscored that EPA, within regulation, the regulation that implements the Superfund statute is called the National Contingency Plan. Within the National Contingency Plan, EPA identifies certain situations and conditions that can constitute a threat to human health. We talked about these together. For example, we discussed exposure of people and food chains directly to hazardous substances in soil, in surface water, in groundwater, etc. We talked about the contamination of drinking water supplies. We talked about the possible threat of a release from drums and tanks that may be may have a loss of competency, maybe near failure. That is a particular threat of a release of hazardous substances into the environment. We talked about high levels of soil contamination near the surface that could migrate, for example, as sheet flow during heavy rainfall. We talked about weather conditions in the near future that could cause contamination to migrate, and mostly that's referring to severe weather events. Hurricanes that can cause very heavy rainfall, very heavy wind, and can serve to cause contamination to migrate away from a site. We also talked about the threat of fire and explosion. And we've seen this threat. You've seen this threat at Wind Process. I've seen this threat at Safety Light, that radioactive factory in Pennsylvania. The threat of a fire can be real, and the possibility that a fire could spread contamination away from a contaminated site can constitute a threat to be addressed by removal action. And finally, we recall that within the regulation, there's always a catch-all. There may be some other situation or factor that the EPA didn't think of when it was preparing this regulation, so there's kind of a catch-all at the end, other conditions. EPA regulation talks about how to react to a threat, and it's not extremely detailed. You don't see a whole lot of language in the statute. The statute, of course, is passed by the legislative branch, and you don't see a lot of information in the regulation either. The regulation is promulgated by the executive branch of government. But EPA does say some things about how to react to a threat when it happens. The regulation, for example, says when EPA determines a threat is present, whether it's exposure of people and food chains to hazardous substances, exposure of drinking water supplies, the threat of a fire or explosion, the threat of pending weather events that could cause contamination to migrate, the threat of containers rupturing or tanks rupturing. EPA, the regulation basically says that EPA is authorized to take action to abate, prevent, to minimize, to stabilize, to mitigate the situation. It talks about eliminating the threat as well, but mostly the words of the regulation talk about attempts to reduce the threat. Sometimes not entirely eliminate the threat, but how to reduce the threat in a reasonable, common sense way. And I say at the bottom of this particular text box, from my perspective, and I warned you at the beginning of all these pre-recorded sessions, these slides do not represent the official position of the United States federal government. Of course, I'm not authorized to do that, but they do represent my opinions and my philosophies based upon a long career with US EPA, having seen many situations at many sites, having performed removal actions, remedial actions, and been involved in enforcement. So from my perspective, removal action is mostly about reducing threat. It's seeking to manage risk as opposed to eliminating risk. It's a photograph, incidentally. I know I didn't do this throughout the past 5 days, but I'll mention this one. This is a photograph of, some form of liquid waste, which was present in a pit at the Wind Process site when I was honored to visit that site with TPCD, the Department of Industrial Works, and many other of course, the Taiwan Ministry of the Environment, and many other regulatory officials during a tour of that site in 2023. But it struck me. I mean, it was an exposed pit of some form of liquid industrial waste. So it's an example of waste storage at Wind Process, a source of contamination, which existed, of course, before the fire at that site in 2024. Another site of Wind Process, undated, unfortunately, pre-fire. And I think what this site demonstrates to me and I'm sure I hope you had an opportunity to explore this further during the wind process site inspection, is that the threat is certainly on site. There's certainly sources in the burned buildings, in the unburned buildings, outside the buildings. The lagoons, of course, represent a concern. But it was evident from photos like this and from my own experiences and observations, and I'm sure you and your team have had similar experiences and observations, that contamination has migrated downstream and down gradient from wind process. There could be exposure concerns, and I hope we get a chance to kind of underline what those were towards the end of this presentation. So, although the regulation gives us some general terms about reducing, mitigating, abating threats posed, threats posed by hazardous waste sites, the statute gives us a couple of examples in terms of what the legislative branch of government was thinking in terms of what a removal action would look like. And some of the language is very general. Any actions the president needs to do to prevent, to minimize, to mitigate damage to public health. So the definition of removal action, it doesn't talk about permanent, comprehensive site remedies. Sometimes those can be unrealistic. Sometimes, in my opinion, what needs to be focused on now is stability, security, and reduction in exposure, more removal actions as opposed to comprehensive, long-term, high-dollar, permanent remedies like remedial actions. So the statute does say that removal actions are whatever the president needs to do to prevent, minimize, and mitigate damage to public health, to human beings posed by hazardous waste sites, posed by sources, posed by impacted media, etc. Give some examples, It talks about the definition of removal action, talks about the installation of security fencing, limiting the access to a site. That's a security enhancement. It talks about providing alternative water supplies. Well, that's clearly related to exposure. It also talks about sometimes the need for temporary evacuations. And once again, that's about exposure. Always think back to that conceptual site model. It's helped me a lot in my career as a project manager. I'm hopeful it's helpful to many of you. It's the pathway from the source via a release mechanism to an impacted media, exposure pathway, and finally to a receptor. So a conceptual site model is that environmental pathway from the source to the person. And sometimes we can't, the source is impossible to deal with. And sometimes the impacted media is too widespread to deal with. Well, there's still other options. Maybe you can deal with the exposure pathways, or maybe you can somehow help the receptors. And I think that's what temporary evacuations was talking about in that definition of removal action within the CERCLA statute. So, security fencing, alternative water supplies, temporary evacuations, those are examples of what removal actions would be as documented in the CERCLA statute in the definition of removal action. And so what I want to do now is going to be exercise number 10, the final group exercise for our time together. And as you can see, there's 5 different pieces to this, and I'm so grateful for everyone's level of effort to work on these issues together, to exchange ideas together. I'm so grateful to the Thailand Pollution Control Department folks for tolerating me above all in these pre-recorded sessions, and I'm obviously very grateful to the Taiwan Ministry of the Environment personnel and their Taiwanese partners for acting as advisors for each of the smaller groups of Thailand Pollution Control Department regulatory officials. The final exercise has 5 distinct pieces, and I kind of want to walk through them. They're not so much teaching. They're really about interacting in that workshop setting. So in small groups first, I would propose that each of the small groups gets together, takes a look at the conceptual site model that was constructed for wind process earlier in the week, and sees if there's ways to update the conceptual site model based upon the site visit. Did the investigative teams in the buildings, or the investigative teams for the lagoons, or the investigative team for security, or the investigative team for impacted media off of the wind process site, did they discover new information about sources, impacted media, exposure pathways, or receptors? And if so, how can that conceptual site model be updated? Work on that in a small group setting. Also in a small group setting, I encourage each of the small groups to have a discussion, based upon the investigative activities that were performed at wind process. What issues were identified at that site with regard to stability, site stability, with regard to site security, and with regard to exposure problems that are happening between people and hazardous substances right now? These initially, number 1 and number 2 there, are small group discussions, updating the conceptual site model with any new information that may or may not be necessary, and having a discussion on personal observations at wind process, observations on stability, security, and exposure. Once those small group discussions are complete, I'd like a workshop leader to lead a workshop-wide discussion. And the goal of that discussion is based upon each of the small groups' results. What would an updated, unified conceptual site model look like for wind process? This is going to take a few minutes. Different people may have different ideas, but the goal of number 3 is for the workshop leader, working with each of the small groups, getting feedback from them, having feedback offered, exchanges happening, to create a unified kind of final conceptual site model for wind process. Always remember, please, it's meant to be a simplified version of reality. You visited the site in 2025 this week. I visited the site in 2023 2 years ago. It's a complex site. There's a lot of aspects to it. The conceptual site model is about simplifying. Simplification, in my opinion, facilitates decision-making. It facilitates action. And that's why, in my opinion, the conceptual site model is a useful tool for project management. Number 4, once that's complete, I'd like the workshop leader to facilitate a discussion on soliciting views from all the small groups. What were the main issues identified at wind process regarding site stability, security, and exposure issues? We're seeking unified conclusions on the main stability, security, and exposure issues currently present at the wind process site. And for 5, the final piece of this workshop, the final piece of this time together, is on a workshop-wide basis. What maybe 1 or 2 or 3 common sense, short-term, relatively low-cost actions could be taken at a wind process site based upon the conceptual site model and based upon our own conclusions regarding site stability, site security, and exposure? What 1 or 2 actions could be taken to increase security at the site, to increase stability at the site, and to decrease exposure at the site? That's meant to be a workshop-wide discussion where folks are coming up with ideas, debating ideas in terms of what a path forward would look like. Okay. Above all, I want to say thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry, once again, I cannot be there in person. It's a regret of mine, but there are obviously things that are sometimes beyond your control. My conclusion is to accept them and move forward as best you can. That's what I have sought to do by preparing these pre-recorded sessions. as well as a narrative report that I'll provide to TPCD and TMOENV regarding how I imagine these exercises would move forward. And I will, of course, look forward to participating as well as possible in a live online format. This is obviously one of the greatest honors of my career to have this opportunity. I want to say thank you to Dr. Chewi, Dr. Hung, Dr. Huang. They're fantastic partners. They're men for whom I have tremendous respect, and I've greatly enjoyed working with them. So I'm going to sign off now. Mitch Cron, United States Environmental Protection Agency. This is the final pre-recorded session for the Trilateral Partnership Workshop, October 2025. Thank you.
Hello, Mitch. Can you hear us? Oh, yeah.
Hey, Dr. Chevi, I can hear you perfectly. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Anything to add?
No, thanks a lot for your participation in these pre-recorded sessions. I really appreciate it. And I guess the thing I'm most curious about will be the results of the inspection at wind process, and above all, the results of the investigative team's observations for security, stability, and exposure. I can't wait to see what the main problems were at the site from the small groups and from the workshop as a whole. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what folks think is a good, reasonable path forward, hopefully relatively low cost, hopefully short term, hopefully very common sense activities to, increase stability at the site, increase security, and reduce exposure. So nothing to add at this time, but I'm excited to see what happens next.
Okay, so let us do our your homework, not us, your homework
Thank you, sir.
For like maybe 40 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Cool. And Dr. Chewi, I've got like 3 slides as suggestions, and I'll look forward to sharing those later.
Okay, afterward. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Yep.
Thank you. ก็ตามที่เขาให้โจทย์มานะครับก็น่าเขาอยากให้เราแบ่งกลุ่มทีนี้มีกระดาษไหมครับทีมงานเอากระดาษมาไหมคลิปชาร์ตตอนนี้เหลือคนอยู่น้อยขอเปลี่ยนเป็น2กลุ่มดีกว่าอ๋อมันจะไม่มีการโต้เถียงไงเมื่อเปลี่ยนเป็น2กลุ่มก็อาจจะดีเผื่อมีความแตกต่างจะได้โต้เถียงกันนิดนึงครับ
We have a picture of the 3 phase 1 point that we visited yesterday.
Oh, okay. I think everyone remember the map, but I think no one remember the question. This one is very update. It's not the same as in the slide.
Really?
Yeah, the slide. I think just leave this one up, and then I think I already line message to everyone the site map.
Okay.
Area map. But you can definitely help. ตกลง2กลุ่มนะครับกลุ่ม1กับกลุ่ม3อยู่คนละฝั่งเลยแล้วกลุ่ม2ของเดิมแล้วแต่สะดวกเลยดูใครฝั่งไหนหน้าตาดีกว่าก็ไปฝั่งนั้นเลยเข้าใจโจทย์ไหมอ่ะทำไมหน้าตาเหมือนเงียบเลยก็โจทย์ two groups because it's a little bit smaller group of the people, so I kind of like split into 2 groups. So so probably you are the first group that way. So you the second group. และหลักคำถามเขาฟังทันไหมอ่ะฟังทันไหมทำไมหน้าตาเหมือนหน้าตาตื่นหมดทุกคนเลยโอเคเอานะเอาทวนคำถามให้นะก็คือเขาอยากให้โจทย์ที่1เลยคืออัปเดตไอ้ CSM ที่ทำหลังจากไปดูไซต์มาแล้วให้อัปเดต CSM ที่ทำก็คือไอ้ไซต์ conceptual model อะไรคือซอสอะไรคือใช่ไหม exposure pathway receptor หลังจากที่อัปเดต CSM เนี่ยให้ตอบคำถาม3อย่างใช่ไหมมันคือ security stability exposure อะไรคือความไม่ปลอดภัย อะไรคือความไม่มีเสถียรภาพความเขา
เสถียรภาพเพิ่มหน่อย
เสถียรภาพอย่างเช่นง่ายที่สุดก็ถังเอาไปกองกันไว้สูงๆมีเสถียรภาพไหมเนี่ยอย่างเงี้ยใช่ไหมถังแตกไม่มีเสถียรภาพอะไรอย่างเงี้ยเรียกว่าแต่ว่าความไม่มีเสถียรภาพอาจจะนำสู่ไปสู่ความไม่ปลอดภัยก็ได้ อย่างเช่นกากของเสียไม่ได้แยกออกจากกันใช่ไหมเราเข้าไปในโรงงานเราอาจจะเห็นในส่วนที่ไฟไหม้ไม่มีใครไปทำอะไรเลย อย่างนี้เรียกว่าไม่มีเสถียรภาพเพราะไอ้โครงสร้างมันกำลังจะล้มลงมาอยู่แล้วก็อาจจะมันไม่มีเสถียรภาพแต่การไม่มีเสถียรภาพก็อาจจะเรื่องไม่ปลอดภัยด้วยใช่
เขามีการจ้างกาดนะคะรปภแต่เราไม่เห็นน้องถามอีกว่ามีไหมมีแต่พี่ไม่รู้ว่าคนไหนเป็นกาด
มีรปภ
นี่แต่ว่า
เห็น
นอนเปลอยู่เมื่อวาน
เพราะหรอ
ตายอยู่ นี่ปักอกอยู่ไม่เห็นมีใคร
มีการจ้างรปภนะ
โอเคทุกคนแล้วทุกคนดิสคัสกับ TA นะเขาที่ว่าเป็นคำถามที่ดีนะ ความแตกต่างระหว่าง security กับ stability แต่เราเข้าใจความหมายเนาะ security คือความปลอดภัย stability คือเสถียรภาพมันอาจจะคล้ายกันแต่ว่ามันก็มีความต่างกัน
stability มันจะในเชิง
คือถ้าถังเอางี้
กระดาษหรือเปล่าที่เป็นขนาดนั้นเลย
ผมเล่าง่ายๆคือถ้าถังน้ำใช่ไหมถ้าถังน้ำกำลังจะล้มลงมาก็เรียกว่าไม่ stability คือไม่ stable แต่มันอาจจะไม่ได้มีอะไรมีปัญหาเนาะเพราะว่าแค่หกลงมาก็น้ำอะไรอย่างนี้
แค่คิดแต่คิดจะมองว่าจะเป็นที่บอกว่าเป็นกระดาษตัวนั้นมันจะเถียนไหมถ้าถาม
อันที่สามคือ exposure ในตอนนี้เรา identify คนผู้รับสารเนี่ยตอนเนี้ยอะไรคือ exposure ที่เราไปดูมาของจริงแล้วเราจะลดได้ยังไงก็อันแรกคำถามนะจะเพิ่ม security ได้ยังไงจะเพิ่ม stability ได้ยังไงจะลด exposure ได้ยังไงโอเคตอนนี้ก็เดี๋ยวทุกท่านทานเบรกไปด้วยแล้วก็เดี๋ยวเราจะเข้าสู่ช่วงสรุปนะครับก็ประเด็นก็คือว่าตัวการบ้านที่ทำไปเนี่ยเดี๋ยวจะใช้วิธีเพราะเนื่องจากว่าถ้าเกิดเราคุยกันอาจจะทะเลาะกันว่าใครดีกว่ากันอะไรอย่างนี้แต่ว่าเดี๋ยวจะใช้วิธีถ่ายรูปแล้วก็ส่งไปให้ทางมิชดูว่าเขาเข้าใจอะไรหรือเปล่าแต่ว่าจริงๆแล้วเนี่ยตลอดหลักสูตรที่ผ่านมาเนี่ยก็มีการเก็บข้อมูลนะแล้วก็ส่งไปให้ทาง USCP มาตลอดทางก็โดยเฉพาะอย่างยิ่งเมื่อคืนก็มีการขอรูปถ่ายกิจกรรมที่ขอไปเป็นไดฟ์แล้วก็ส่งไปให้ทาง USCP แล้วเดี๋ยวพอเราทานเบรกเสร็จเราก็อาจจะขออนุญาตส่งรูปที่ทำในกระดานนี้ให้มิชแล้วก็ให้มิชเขาสรุปมาเลยเป็นออนไลน์จากทางนู้นนะครับเขาจะได้ไปนอนเพราะว่ากำหนดการก็คือว่าเดี๋ยวเขาต้องไปนอนตอน11 โมงของเราก็คือเที่ยงคืนที่เพนซิลเวเนียOkay, Mish. I think we already done the homework. Your homework. To save the time because I think the discussion is really hot and then people discuss a lot. So we kind of like taking picture and then send it to you as so that you can understand what they are trying to summarize, how to conclude as like CSM, and then the question about stability, security, for the site. So right now we kind of want us to moving on to the conclusion. After you will be the first one, and then afterward will be Taiwan side to conclude, but we might go on definitely beyond 11 o'clock and beyond the midnight, but so that if you feel so tired, you can definitely side off in between. Okay, please.
Cool. Thanks, Che. Thanks, Dr. Che. We really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who worked on this together, and thanks so much to the TPCD regulatory staff who worked on this, and the Taiwan Ministry of the Environment advisors who worked on this as well. It looked like you guys were doing great work, and I hope the week was an overall success. It looked really good from what I could see, and thanks to Dr. Hung for keeping me updated. Thanks for providing the videos and the photographs. I really appreciated it. I have just a very basic, I want to share my screen real quick. I've got just a couple of short slides to kind of share my perspective on, Dr. Hung was able to send me a number of photographs and videos and just overall perspective during the week. And I kind of thought about it for a little while, and I wanted to share my perspective on next steps. As I think you probably know, the theme of the presentations that US EPA put together were increasing stability, increasing security, and decreasing exposure. So I thought about reasonable, kind of common sense, hopefully low cost, hopefully relatively quick activities that I thought made sense. And obviously I recognize that the investigative teams who were there on the ground have the best perspective on this and the best insights. But these were some insights that I had based upon materials that were shared by the workshop leaders with me. So I really appreciated that. So Trilateral Partnership Workshop, October 2025. It's kind of an Americanism. It's like an American saying, but maybe it's international. The theme that I kind of wanted to focus was cross one bridge at a time. The solution to win process is going to be, it's going to be, years, decades, and probably a number of careers in the making. It's going to be a long time before you get to completion on that site. But, my kind of thought was that if possible, kind of cross one bridge at a time, do what you can reasonably do in the short term to, of course, increase stability, increase security, and decrease exposures. And, Dr. Hung, I couldn't help it that the photograph of the bridge you sent me and the staining on the bridge was so just jumps out at you that I wanted to share that in my presentation. So I have 3 suggestions for your consideration. The first suggestion is, it's obviously security. Security is very important to me at a contaminated site. The idea that I had was to seek to achieve operational control of the site as soon as possible. In my own experience, sometimes when you have an abandoned, unstable, contaminated site where it's been abandoned by its operator, sometimes those kind of facilities can be real magnets for folks that want to bring additional hazardous waste, additional waste materials on the site for the purpose of illegal dumping. Sometimes it's occurred in USA that when a site is abandoned, and it's known to be a contaminated site, other parties seem to think that you can't make things worse by bringing more waste there. So sometimes these hazardous waste sites can act as kind of a magnet for more hazardous waste from other, kind of almost illegal operators. So I would say one of the most important things to consider is really seeking to gain operational control and security at the site, just to ensure that no additional waste comes onto the site. And I thought about this, and I recognize that, if complete security is not really a possibility, if that's inachievable, then at least make sure you've got good control of the roads coming onto the site. Gates, bollards, fences, warning signs, even visits to the site by security and police personnel. Maybe not every day, but maybe as part of their routine. If you could work with local officials to get them in the habit of checking the security at the site, that might be very helpful, just to seek to prevent the site from acting as a dumping ground for additional hazardous waste from other, somewhat illegal, somewhat unethical waste transporters. So my first thought was security. The second thought I had was, I recognize that, the hazardous waste cleanup on the site, and certainly the cleanup of environmental media, soil, groundwater, surface water, sediment, is going to be a tall order. So something to think about might be to begin with the cleanup of non-hazardous waste at the site. Once you've got security kind of in place, it might make sense to attempt to clear the site of non-hazardous waste, empty containers, refuse, rubbish. in my experience, I want to share with you my own personal philosophies. All environmental projects, they tend to run on momentum. Once they get started, once they're moving, it becomes easier to keep them moving towards completion. The hard part sometimes is getting a site cleanup started. And it might make sense, and it's a suggestion of mine, recognizing the hazardous waste cleanup is going to be a massive project. Maybe just start with the non-hazardous waste, dealing with the refuse, the rubbish, empty containers, non-contaminated materials. Maybe getting those off the site is kind of a first step towards, clarifying what's still out there and enabling you to focus on, once the non-hazardous waste is cleared, it might make the site a cleaner picture to focus on the contaminated materials. These are sort of simple, practical, relatively low cost, relatively quick first steps. And the third step, from my perspective, I really think that, based upon the photographs and the videos that I observed over the course of the week, I think containers are the key. A suggestion that I had, it's kind of a philosophical suggestion, is I think it makes sense to have one person who's truly in charge of the containers on the site. I called them, I made some notes to Dr. Chewi and Dr. Hung and Dr. Huang, and I suggested assigning a container manager, a person that has decision-making control over the containers on the site, a person who can kind of make decisions about the inventory, what's out there, what kind of damaged containers require disposal, what kind of non-damaged containers could be stored on site. And I'd like that container manager. My suggestion would be, once a person has the authority to manage the containers on the site, that person should create a container management plan. Really, I think the first step from my perspective is containers are the key. Start by inventorying what you have out there, get to know what you have out there, the knowns and the unknowns. Step 2, determine what can be disposed of off-site, what can't be disposed of off-site based upon the current waste management capabilities in Thailand. And then third, start with the damaged containers. Obviously, based upon the photographs that I observed, there's a massive quantity of tanks, drums that are still on the site. That's almost too much to deal with on day one. I would suggest, in terms of managing those containers, that container manager start with the damaged containers first, figuring out what's in them. Can they be disposed of off-site? If they can, let's get those off-site first. And if they can't be disposed of off-site, let's transfer the contents of those containers to more competent, better conditioned containers, and find ways to manage those materials on site for the foreseeable future. So I think those are the 3 suggestions, Dr. Chewi, that I would start out with. First and foremost, operational security, securing the site to ensure that waste doesn't come onto the site. Second, maybe just get started with non-hazardous waste cleanup. Get the rubbish, the refuse, the garbage, the empty containers, etc. Get that off-site first to a non-hazardous waste landfill, and that might help to clarify the situation. Sort of removing those non-hazardous wastes might set the stage to more successfully manage hazardous waste. And then third, I would say the containers are the key. The most important thing from my perspective is to have a person that has decision-making authority to manage those containers on the site, and frankly, some level of budget to be able to do so. Allow them to create a container management plan, start with the damaged containers first, and then work your way down from there. Those would be 3 suggestions that I would have, which would serve as kind of removal actions in the near term. And I'm so excited to hear what the rest of the workshop thinks, the TPCD personnel, as well as the Taiwan Ministry of the Environment personnel. Thank you.
A little bit more of the question for you. I've seen it throughout the workshop that in the case of like leaking and like broken container like this, we should make a plan to replace the container first. Do you agree on that, Mitch?
Could you repeat that question, Dr. Chewi?
My point is on is the container that is seem to be leaking and broken should be replaced first, so that it can stop like leaking, immediate leaking. But before doing anything else, just replace the container. Yeah, something like that.
I could not agree with you more. I completely agree with you. You know, it's kind of like a site stability concern. If you know you have an ongoing release or an imminent release from containers that are clearly in bad shape, that would, if I was the container manager and I had my inventory complete and I knew how many containers were out there, I knew the condition of the containers and the contents, what I would do is start out, you got to use each bot or each dollar smartly. And I would start with the damaged containers first. If you can dispose of that off-site safely, that's probably best. If you don't have that capability today, I would say transfer that material to a new container or a used container in better shape, but definitely start out with the damaged containers. Once those are sort of stabilized, then you move on from there to the undamaged containers. That makes complete sense, Dr. Chaoui.
Yeah, because it's the kind of dilemma, right? People think it's leaking, so that they don't want to touch them, then it make it continue leaking like that. So, okay. มีใครมีคำถามอะไร any question for Mish more question for Mish
I would like to ask you for one more question. So can you suggest us about how to manage the wastewater in lagoon? What do you think about the wastewater in the lagoon?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think from my perspective, it's a tough issue. You know, there's a lot of wastewater in that lagoon, and it clearly represents an ongoing threat to downgradient areas. I think if I was seeking to manage the site, I think the most important thing to me would be to seek to verify the stability of the berms. You know, I do recognize that the lagoons are clearly probably leaking wastewater and liquid waste to downstream areas over time. But it seems to me that a problem that is that large, you know, there's a large quantity of wastewater in those lagoons. That might be, for me, that might be a little further down the line in terms of remediation. I think in the short term, in like days and weeks and months, I would just seek to try and stabilize those lagoons by verifying that the berms are in good shape, the berms are not going to fail. So for me, the lagoons are definitely an ongoing threat, but I would probably push that further down the line and focus for now on the stability of the berms. That's where I think I would spend my time. Thanks for the question.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So the probably final question for you from the Department of Industrial Work is that do you have any example or probably like some clue from for the Ministry of Industry who actually responsible for the site now? Obviously they has like a budget for this year operation. Probably they asked a very broad question on how do they design the project from now on. They asked if you remember, probably they asked for เท่าไหร่นะ460 million baht. That's asking, but probably this year get 60 million, close to 60 million baht. So it's like one fifth of what they asked. So what if you are them? This year task is to decide what should we do for this year. So they want you to give some clue. Yeah. Aside from coming to help, give them some clue so that they can start. Yeah. Please.
Yeah.
This last.
That's a great question, Dr. Che. I'd be happy to work with you and with the Ministry of Industry on an ongoing basis, however I can. I think that, with a limited budget, I think you obviously it's a question of priorities and attempting to do what can be done in the near term to increase stability, increase security, and reduce exposure. If it was me, I think that my initial expenditure would be on security, gaining operational security of the facility and preventing more waste from coming onto the site. And that would probably be a combination of fences, gates, and possibly coordination with local law enforcement. If I didn't have money for total security, I would I would ensure that I had operational security with roads that are accessible by wheeled vehicles. I think once that's complete, I would focus the remainder of my budget on container management. I would definitely want to seek to perform the inventory of containers and remove damaged containers as quickly as practicable. So I think my focus would be security first and foremost, and then container management. Container management being a container management plan, and then focusing on the damaged containers first. That's how I would spend the initial budget of money that I was allocated by the government. I'd be happy to work with you on an ongoing basis to help work on some of the operational and strategic plans for that, but that would be my objective.
Okay, I think it's very clear.
Thanks, Chewi. Thank you, Dr. Chewi.
Okay, thank you so much. So probably ไม่เขาชัดแบบprobably next is the conclusion from Taiwan. Mitch, you are very welcome to continue listen, but I know that it's already your midnight, so feel free to sign off at any time. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Che. I will listen in for a little bit.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, Mitch and Chai and all the partners, and we are glad we have the privilege to stay here for a week and with all of the partners here. So I will just kind of quickly summarize what we have been doing for past 5 days, and we are grateful to have this opportunity. And later we will have Professor Chen that conclude our program today. Okay, so next, well, actually in this training program we have gone through in particular, and thank you for Mitch's great effort of carry out the whole program, and so as all the pre-recording and the materials. So we actually learn about how to building the conceptual site model, and based on what we we have been learning the whole week about the source, pathway, and receptor, and hopefully this can be embedded and in our future work. Also, we go on to the wind process side for some practicing, including today's our updating the site conceptual model, and hopefully this will be our great accomplishment for all of us. And so, okay, next. And so actually, we just come up with some of the maybe afterthought and some recommendation for the wind process side, based on what we found about the source, pathway, and receptor. And so these are actually kind of collective wisdom from all the participants here, and we simply just put them together. Okay. Now, so we have come up with some recommendation for the wind process. And next, please. So the about mainly, I think the source control is very important for this one. So we have a kind of some of the recommendations, including the on-site waste management. I think Mitch mentioned that just now, and we think including identification of the waste and sorting, and also repackaging the storage, because we saw a lot of the broken tow or barrel, and those has to be properly managed. Also, there's a lagoon nearby, and also because of the surface water flooding, and that actually causing the neighborhood ponds also being contaminated. And for example, for the lagoon, I think that the one thing is because there's a liner at the bottom and that becomes the source to the groundwater. And maybe think about, removing water and install a liner, maybe a helpful measures. And for groundwater, and it's maybe we can just think about how to contain the migration of the groundwater and some of the hydraulic control, and also the soil for the onsite in process side. The order is not necessary in this fashion, but I think these are the kind of measures that for your consideration. And next, please. And for the pathway control, I think actually this is also kind of collective from all the participants during the practice. So for the onsite, that maybe you have some proper health and safety plan for including the removal actions, and also some of the administrative measures. For example, that some of the fencing or warning signs or prevent the resident nearby something to get trespassing the site. And also for the offsite, we know that without kind of proper resources to do the remediation, maybe we can think about some of the groundwater use control or communication, and also some of the surface water flow control, which actually causing the migration and expansion of the contamination. Next, please. Finally, that we go through some of the sampling, some sampling demonstration, and I think that in the future maybe for the monitoring plan, maybe we should think about we can think about the objective of the monitoring, and that can help to get kind of more appropriate data for monitoring data in the future. Also, that the method that available to us, including the soil and groundwater sampling method, maybe should be linked into the sampling plan, and some of the including the sample when you're doing a sampling about cross-continental information. So that's our observation, and this is basically to conclude our kind of in the afterthought for the wind process site. And if and some of maybe if any supplementary information that you can just what am I missing, you can put it into. And so next please. And after this, and we will have a Professor Chen to conclude our meeting. Anything else? No idea. Okay. Please, Professor Chen's presentation.
Good morning, everyone. After 5 days of training and meeting discussion, I was considered as a brainstorming, and I think I would like to give a conclusion. Some of the idea has been have been brought by Dr. Huang in the previous presentation. However, my goal is try to give you a general master plan of what we should do in terms of a government agency or from the point of view of a local resident. Next, please. So the first issue I do like to share with you is the social impact. Never ever underestimate the impact of or the feeling of local residents. In my past experience, deal with illegal dumping sites in Taiwan, either is contaminated by heavy metal or contaminated by dioxin. No matter what kind of a pollutant, what you worry about is the health. Health risk assessment will be the first issue we should conduct, or at least we should give local residents a physical exam annually or biannually. Because as we went to the site on Wednesday, I think the mayor of a local government, his major concern actually represent the concern of a general public in the nearby area. Therefore, I will encourage all of us always keep that in mind. risk communication with the local villager is very important. We should set up that routinely. Maybe it's in the format of a town meeting, no matter it's a formal or informal. However, when people gather together, or maybe even in the event of a religion activity, we can just announce that, hey, ladies and gentlemen, that this is a government officer representing pollution control department. I'd like to share with you the update information, blah, 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 something like that. I think it's very important. Always keep that in mind. And using the simple language, people from the local area may not understand what is a BOD, what is a conductivity, what is the VOC, volatile organic compound. But they do drink water, they do breathe the air in the nearby area. So I think my first suggestion is that always communicate with the local people and give them the progress where the hazardous waste go. Where are they? Where are they being treated properly or not? I think they have the right to know. They have the right to know to know exactly what is the progress or also the status of the site. Okay. And the second thing is that people will tend to think about that. Wow, this is a big site. We have 3 government agencies involved. The remediation work must be quick, very fast, like this. But on the other hand, through the meeting, as I just mentioned, we have to try to educate people, communicate with people. The remediation work is going to take very, very long. Don't try to make them too optimistic. Don't promise, hey, our government will finish up remediation work in 3 years. Even though you have the confidence to finish up the work in 3 years, I'll suggest +2. Maybe we can finish up that in 5 years. If you definitely finish up the work in 3 years, at least that give you the flexibility if something goes wrong. That's what I highly recommend. Because I supervise a lot of contaminated sites in Taiwan, I met with lots of local people, also with people from government on both sides. Therefore, I do like to share my experience particularly in this part, the social impact. Never underestimate the potential social impact. Always put local people's benefit on top of the list. Okay. Next, please. Okay. I think Dr. Huang just mentioned a little bit about the technical part. I do like to summarize a certain point from the very first end to the end of this site for your reference. So if you have any question regarding what should we do in the next 36 months or maybe in the next 5 years, I would like to discuss with you in more detail after my quick presentation. So let me finish up that and also interpret some of the detail. And so maybe we can discuss that after my presentation. Third thing is always keep that in mind. Groundwater resources. I noticed it's not a very overpopulated area. People are scattered in the nearby area. But however, they pump groundwater for irrigation. They may pump groundwater for drinking purpose or not. Or they may, in order to save money, they will pump groundwater to wash their car, to clean up vegetable, that kind of activity, to do the laundry, blah, 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 all the activity. So protecting groundwater resources will be the first priority. Okay, that's the first issue. I do like to mention that. It doesn't matter the air quality is bad or something is bad. There is the storage tank leaking on site, but always consider groundwater resources. Try to protect that. And on the other hand, I do like to mention the necessity of a contingency plan. Always put that in your pocket. The contingency plan should include what if something goes wrong for the hazardous waste treatment facility? What if they cannot treat solvent? They cannot treat hazardous waste. Let's say in 90 days, what are you going to do? Or then temporary shutdown for any particular reason. Your contingency plan should include the following item. Firstly, if something goes wrong for the hazardous waste treatment facility, that's my plan B. Okay. Another thing, on site. My past experience always tell me, on the contaminated site, there is always something goes on. People might smell something bad because you dig out a big hole and boom, some toxic fume just come out, and that affect the health in the nearby area. So, for the safety of those workers, they work in contaminated site, always think about your plan B. You should have an escape plan for them in case something goes wrong, something burning, something explode. There is an escape plan. They can go out easily, safely, something like that. The third one is we should have a bigger picture for the impact area. When I mean impact area means the boundary on the map, which is the potential area could be impacted either by contaminated groundwater or by contaminated soil, or they will breathe the contaminated aerosol, or they may drink contaminated groundwater. So always have a contingency plan, including the following 3 items. That I will highly recommend. Okay, next please. And regarding the remediation plan, based upon our past experience, I think the first comes first. We always try to keep that in mind. Removal of hazardous waste and the solid waste will be the first priority. Otherwise, you cannot achieve soil and groundwater remediation work. And I know it's a very difficult job because therefore I go through the detail. First of all, we see lots of 55-gallon tank. We also see big plastic tank. Some of them are cracking. Some of them are broken. Some of them are completely well, I think in good shape. No matter what, there is a hard work we should propose. Maybe we don't have a budget, or maybe we will have a budget in the next 3 years. Always keep that in mind. Characterization of a hazardous waste. Tank type tank. Because it's unlike the water bottle I'm holding. I definitely know this is water. It might have a different layer, which means that with a different kind of a solvent mixed together, or maybe plus a lubricant. That makes things very complicated. So, I know this task will take forever, will take some time. However, a well-documented hazardous waste will help you to send it to the facility. They will know, oh, okay, this is organic. Inorganic. This is it. Under the group of inorganic, they will know, okay, this is acidic, this is acid, strong acid, this is a strong base, or this is a heavy metal contaminated solution. They should subgroup that tank by tank. I know this is going to take forever. You might think, oh, Dr. Professor Chen, you are crazy. You just are so ideal. But trust me, if you don't do that upfront, later on you will get headache. Okay, so characterization of hazardous waste based upon the ignitability, the corrosivity, the reactivity, and the toxicity. I think it's all well-established method in the US EPA SWA 46. And it's time-consuming, but it is essential. So keep that in mind. And the second issue is try to make sure also evaluate the potential treatment method of hazardous waste. I do know right now the waste solvent is treated by a contract factory. They are doing that right now. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, if something goes wrong for that facility, you should have a plan B. At least in your pocket, oh, okay, maybe for those waste solvent, we can use other method, blah, 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 something like that. Okay, that's the second issue. The third issue is the most important one, the storage facility. Because we have a cooking tank, we have some semi-filled tank, which means that half of the liquid has been leaking, as half of them is still in the tank. You should manage a safe place to temporarily store that. If you don't have enough budget or money to move that, let's say, okay, I do have a budget. I will make sure all the tank, all the waste remove out of the site in 1 month. Good. But if you don't have a budget, at least put them in a safe place, which means the concrete ground and with shelter, and make sure it's not direct sunlight exposure, because otherwise some of them might explode. In my experience, when our people go to the site, we try to drill a sample. All of a sudden, something comes out in the subsurface environment. It's very, not just dangerous, it might hurt people will hurt those workers. Okay, that's the third issue I would like to mention. And finally, of course, the treatment facility right now we have a contract company they're doing that, and we don't worry about that. As the role of a PCD, you might be able to supervise their performance routinely. Okay, that's I do like to recommend. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the alternative treatment method of hazardous waste. If this company doesn't work out, we should have an alternative method. Next slide. Okay, and now we go to the major issue. After we classify, we characterize hazardous waste and the solid waste, and we do find several methods to treat them or temporarily store them. Then we can move on to soil and the groundwater remediation work. And the first thing, rule of thumb, is to establish the potential boundary of impact area. And keep that in mind. Yeah, people might think you are over-exaggerating, but always try to be more conservative. Put a bigger area instead of shrinking smaller area. Because if you put a bigger picture, at least people know, oh, right now I'm living in the inside the boundary. Oh, I'm aware of that. But if you put a small boundary, people outside the boundary, eventually their groundwater was contaminated. They might blame you. They say, hey, you didn't tell me the truth. So, as I suggest, put a bigger boundary. And will also make sure when you set up the how many days you will be able to achieve the remediation, sometimes it will become easier. Okay. And the second item is selecting the proper and the money-saving soil treatment method. I would highly recommend we should do it on-site because if you transport the contaminated soil to the outside facility, all the pathway might be contaminated, causing a secondary contamination. If you want to do so, make sure your transportation method, the road they use must be GPS monitored. Make sure the truck loading the contaminated soil from point A to point B is actually going the final destination, but not going somewhere else and to do another kind of illegal dumping. Because we do find out that in Taiwan, people hire a taxi parallel with the big truck. The GPS is unload the taxi. So the taxi follow the legal way to the treatment facility. The truck follow the illegal way to the dumping site. How smart they are. Always try to prevent this kind of activity. Okay. And finally, if you find out and propose a certain method of the soil treatment, still you need to have a plan B. Because people will claim, oh, this method is good, the removal efficiency is 95% to 99%, but it turns out it might be only 50%. Or maybe it's good in dry season, but in monsoon, in rainy season, the performance is bad. So you should always put that in mind. You should have a plan B for the soil treatment method. Next, please. And finally, I think Dr. Huang just mentioned that, but I do like to emphasize the importance of a monitoring plan. In contract to remediation plan, I think monitoring plan will not be very costly. But I mean, the budget should be less. Why? Because monitoring is just doing something routinely. So you should have a hazardous waste monitoring program on site. Make sure to watch, to oversee those inorganic and organic waste on site, no matter it's in plastic container or in 55-gallon tank. Make sure they are safely settled down on site. Okay, that's one monitor. That's the first monitoring program. The second one, you definitely need groundwater monitoring program. As I mentioned in the first slide, groundwater is very important because people is going to drink that. So in your groundwater monitoring program, you should including all the major parameters, which means all the heavy metal analysis, which means like arsenic, mercury, cadmium, copper, lead, zinc, chromium. Because right now, these days, we have ICP people. I mean, all the laboratory, they equip with ICP. With a one-shot deal, they will be able to analyze all the elements which you are interested in. It will not be time-consuming or money or very costly. So keep that in mind. The groundwater monitoring program routinely. If you cannot do that monthly, at least propose a seasonal groundwater monitoring program. But I do like to mention for on-site or for the nearby area close to the factory, I would highly recommend do the groundwater monitoring monthly to see the change. However, due to the budget constraint, you may not have enough money. At least you should do that. We should do the seasonal groundwater monitoring, okay? And the third one, because with the lagoon on the down gradient, we should have a surface water monitoring program. try to see the change of a pH value and the conductivity. The more of the conductivity means more of the leachate containing heavy metal go infiltrate that lagoon. And I think the lagoon is our final barrier. Therefore, I will propose in the next slide how to prevent it go further south. Okay. So the surface water monitoring program, that's the other issue. And the air quality monitoring program is basically for those workers on site. Because other than they wear the proper mask, we should have a air quality monitoring program for the safety of the people who work on site. Okay? And the fifth one, to verify quality of a treated soil, which means for PCD, they might routinely check the treated soil in the treatment facility. They should be able to arrange, say, okay, I'm going to visit your facility. I'm going to sample in your treated sample and to make sure the quality of your treatment. That's the fifth one. And finally, if you have enough budget, you can do that. If you don't, just put that in your mind. Because people in the nearby area, they are farmers. So crops and the fish, they may eat that or they may sell that to the market. So for the safety, for food safety, you can propose the crop and the fish monitoring to make sure they don't contain heavy metal. Okay? Next slide, please. The final one. And finally, I do like to mention, we need to build up our Berlin Wall. As I mentioned, in the lagoon area. As I discussed with some of your colleagues, the groundwater downgradient area, you can either use a sheet pile. Of course, I know that's very costly. Or maybe use a concrete plus FRP coating because it's corrosive. It's maybe very basic, where pH value is 14, or maybe it's acidic, pH less than 1. I think at least the FRP will expel them to prevent their further south gradient. Okay? And all of these issues, I think I'm a very practical person. I try to give people, our friend in Thailand, a very practical suggestion, not those in the cloud which you cannot achieve or is over budget. So that's all my conclusion regarding the wind process side. And I'll be happy to take any question and discussion. Thank you for your patience and listening. Thank you.
I may want to ask like a quick question maybe for you. There's a lot of discussion on building like as you know, like a Berlin Wall, for actually not for like above ground level, but actually for underground and also like a little bit for runoff control. So there has been also a discussion on instead of like for groundwater control, if we kind of like using the sheet pile system, if you do a bad calculation or don't do a calculation at all, maybe it's not working, right? Instead of that, many people suggest that we should do more like PRB, which in Thailand we haven't has any experience. A lot of people say that they know, but we don't actually have experience. So how do you feel like PRB versus like sheet pile, and if so, then probably might be like a future cooperation. Can you help us like calculate and set up a good PRB system?
Yeah, we use a PRB in Taiwan. Before give a more detailed explanation, I try to explain the PRB, that reactive barrier. I think can be used for two way. One is to prevent the contaminated chlorinated solvent, such as I think we have that in this side. And for heavy metal, sometimes because you are precipitate the heavy metal. But again, that will create a secondary problem because there will be precipitation in the subsurface environment. You may need to dig out treat them as a hazardous waste or solid waste. Okay, I'll let you finish.
Okay, for this kind of pH, I think you may focus on the first things is the pH issues. So for a PRB, it is a lot of way to inject some neutralizers with some material and to inject it or use a very specific machine to mix the soil with this kind of material to create a buffer zone. It's a much easier way to compared with the sheet pile because you need a very long sheet pile to constrain the whole region. So this would be one of the method, and this kind of machine is not much in Taiwan so far, especially sometimes, especially in your side, you may need to dig about 15 meter to 20 meter depth. Yeah, so it is a very, very deep consideration if you want to use PRB in this side. So maybe the other consideration may be hydraulic control. So you just try to circulate the water layer, and you can pump it up and re-inject on the up gradient. So you can constrain in certain specific area. Or the third method may be you can also use kind of plume stop things and inject like one circle, second circle, and connect to each other. Of course, your side is very, very deep. So it's relatively deep. So it's also costs a lot. So there's three potential suggestions you can use in this side.
What is it? The third question again, like that you just said, maybe I don't catch it. Like what injection?
Yeah. It's also a material named plume stop.
Plume stop.
Yeah,
we don't have that in Thailand. So it's basically a chemical. That's what you use in Taiwan. We don't have it here.
For the permeable reactive barrier, the PRB, in Taiwan we do have we do use that floor is not enough. True PRB.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Using the treatment trend concept, because PRB cannot. Theoretically, they will say, you can stop, you will react with your contaminated groundwater, with your plume. If the concentration of your contaminant is too high, your PRB only lasts 6 months. I oversee a site, their PRB just dead. It doesn't function properly. So, instead of using one wall, maybe one and the next 10 meter, the other one.
It's definitely gonna cost a lot less than using the sheet pile, right?
I don't know. It depends.
This size is really wide.
Well, I think that for the PRB, and because right now your challenge will be the pH, right? So. Well, it has been quite a while, but I did try to design a PRB for the Department of Energy before, and that was although that's a long time ago, but it's an issue about the heavy metal and nuclear as well as the pH, and so what we put is a PRB. That's one question. because you need the engineering capacity to do the PRB, in particular if you really have a deep connectivity. Yeah, so that of course we can design something with the hanging type of PRB, but that you need some of the modeling so that the part of the contaminated water can go back under the PRB.
At least we know the not roughly, like a really good. We already have a good idea on groundwater direction because of the.
You need a good modeling capacity to do that, and also that you can try to maybe using the zeolite as a filling material, using zeolite, and
to that find that chemical like a
zeolite is a little bit cheaper, and so that this is alternative is one project in Chicago that it's using the blast furnace slab. So it's a kind of that's a good for pH control, but this is part of the waste from the steel steel mill, and they have that kind of waste can be reused, and that's what's carried out in the Chicago. So there are a couple examples. Also, I think that one maybe can consider is a GCW, groundwater circulation well, put on the barrier. But
I thought people already stopped doing that from your teaching to me, like because you say there's a whole lot of waste of energy or something like that.
You mean
So-
for GCW? Yeah,
Because it's use a lot of energy, right? And then
yeah, it's a kind
Check
of
out.
active type of thing, but the radius influence much.
or do we plant some special tree or something? Because there's a special tree can do like
Vital.
yeah, not for phyto, but actually for hydraulic control.
That I don't think.
Phytoremediation can only absorb like let's say 1% of the heavy metal. It might pass a field exam, field study. After 4 years, we have heavy metal contamination plus TPH, petroleum hydrocarbon contamination. We estimate we should plant the tree. The tree will remove heavy metal in 99 years. I think people will not fail with that. My suggestion is, with the budget concern, if the PRB is too expensive, at least you should, from the front end, at least you should be able to reduce the concentration level of contaminant, which means you might require pump and treat upfront. At least withdraw some free product of organic solvent. Treat them is much better. Treat them on the ground is easier than in the subsurface environment. So withdraw the free phase product of either mixture of organic solvent. That's the first step. That will guarantee the lifetime of a PRB longer. So never ever just install a PRB, and the PRB will suffer high concentration level of contaminant. It will die very fast.
So, more additional information. We tried to use oyster shell and the powder of oyster shell as a kind of a calcium carbonate. Yeah, so it can used for reduce the pH in the soil. So it's maybe used as a material of the PRB. But the question is, when you do the neutralization, the heavy metal or a lot of things will precipitate inside the PRB. So I'm not pretty sure. You need to dig up so it will become for maybe the first year, second year is okay, but for long term, it will be clogged, and then you need to dig it out. So there's a lot of consideration. You may step by step to do it, or to just Professor Chen said, the first step, you want to reduce the concentration immediately, you can do something. And then after the source of the soil, or after the hazardous was removed, you do the next step, and considering to do the other things. So green remediation is one consideration, of course, but the green and the sustainable remediation is to consider a suitable method for this site. We think is best net benefit, instead of waste a lot of energy. So this is the key concept.
Okay. I would highly recommend, if you want to propose a PRB, make sure do it the pilot scale first, not the full scale, because money. Just do a pilot scale. Let's say you set up that at a certain designated area. For example, the retention pond is over there. By all means, set up semi or 20 meter of a see how that work. Don't just invest money to the whole scale. Okay.
A quick one. Actually, also that for the, if you really PRB is the choice, that you better have a bench scale assessment on the material you are trying to fill in. So that's the first step. You need to do that. And the second thing is that usually, at least when we were commissioned by the Department of Energy, they asked for the design life of the 30 years. So we did that by screening the material, that make sure that in the column test, it will not clog within certain time of period. So that's something you need to do before you really consider PRB. And also one thing is, just like Professor Chen said, you better have a pilot test. And Department of Energy did that, but that failed. Why that failed? Because we do screen the problem material, but the hydrogeology got it wrong. So the intercept direction got it wrong. So you need to have a good capability of the modeling. So for your design. And so the pilot, actually, we designed the material, the thickness of the PRB for 30 years. Unfortunately, the hydrogeology got it wrong, and so it cut down to 12 years or something like that. The lifespan got shortened because it's not really correctly intercept the groundwater. So that's a kind of a couple maybe the design lifespan of 30 years, maybe for your reference. And also that I would like to mention one thing is sometimes still we think that maybe the sheet tile is a good choice, but you still need a good modeling capacity to make sure there's no kind of detour go around your sheet pile as well as go under your sheet pile. And so that's one thing so at the end of the day, you still need a good capacity to do the hydrogeology modeling. I think that's probably the essential you probably use.
That's right. Yeah, I'm actually gonna try to translate some of your message to all the people so that they understand. ก็หลังจากที่ฟัง recommendation ก็มีการสอบถามนะครับว่าเทคโนโลยีอะไรที่ใช้ในการแก้ปัญหาพื้นที่ได้ณปัจจุบันนี้ซึ่งเขาก็ตอนแรกเนี่ยก็คือการพูดว่าน่าจะใช้ผนังคือทำผนังไฟเบอร์กลาสคือ FRP รอบพื้นที่ทีเนี้ยการทำชีทพายกั้นน้ำใต้ดินรอบพื้นที่แล้วก็น้ำผิวดินด้วยมันน่าจะ60 ล้านไม่น่าจะพอน่าจะเป็น100 ล้านเพราะว่าเราต้องกั้นหมดพื้นที่เลยเหมือนทำรั้วขึ้นมาใหม่รั้วใต้ดินและรั้วผิวดินในเวลาเดียวกันก็เสียบชีทพายลงไป ทีละปอกจนเพราะมันเกี่ยวกัน ก็สร้างกำแพงใต้ดิน ก็จะจบเลยก็คือไม่มีน้ำใต้ดินและน้ำผิวดินไหลเข้าพื้นที่ได้ แยกน้ำผิวดินกับน้ำใต้ดินไหลออกจากพื้นที่ อีกทางหนึ่งที่ญี่ปุ่นเขาทำกันก็คือ trench ทำผนังไม่ได้ก็ทำร่องน้ำแทน คือกรมโรงงานนะเคยอาจจะมีโพสเรื่องของการทำไดรอบพื้นที่เพื่อกั้นน้ำผิวดิน ไดคือการต้องหาดินมาทำผนัง แต่ trench คือการทำหลุมลงไปพอดีไปดูที่ญี่ปุ่นมาใต้ดินเขาใช่ ก็ทำเขื่อนใต้ดินก็คือทำ trench ขึ้นมาใต้ดิน ก็คือขุดอะก็คือถ้าทำเป็นถ้าดินมันแพงก็ขุด อันเนี้ยเป็นวิธีสำหรับคนไม่ต้องทำโมเดล ก็คือนึกอะไรไม่ออกก็คือทำผนังขึ้นมาเลยล้อม แบบเราไม่ต้องทำโมเดล ซึ่งวิธีเนี้ยก็จะเหมาะกับคนไม่ค่อยมีความสามารถในการคำนวณ แต่มีตังค์ก็คือทำไปเลยล้อมพื้นที่ ทีนี้เมื่อกี้ก็เลยคุยกันเรื่อง advanced technology ซึ่งมี2 อัน ก็คือ permeable reactive barrier คือน้ำใต้ดินไหลไปทางไหน ให้เอา reactive media ไปวางขวางน้ำใต้ดินไว้ แล้วก็ให้จับซึ่งเป็นวิธีที่ต่างประเทศทำกันเยอะมาก PRB เนี่ยก็ทางนี้ก็เตือนว่ามีปัญหาอยู่2 แบบก็คือ เนื่องจากตอนนี้น้ำเรามันปนเปื้อนแหลกลานเลยเขาก็กลัวว่า PRB จะอยู่ได้ไม่ได้นานเพราะปกติ PRB ก็จะทำสำหรับพื้นที่ที่แบบว่าปนเปื้อนไม่เยอะละอะไรเงี้ยแต่ป้องกันน้ำออกไปข้างนอกก็คือน้ำมันไหลไปทางไหน เราก็จะทำเหมือนเอาตะแกรงแล้วก็ใส่ reactive media ลงไปที่ตะแกรงพอน้ำไหลผ่านปุ๊บไอตัว reactive media ก็จะออกซิไดซ์ส่วนใหญ่ก็จะเป็นการออกซิไดซ์ตัวน้ำที่ไหลผ่านจนถ้าเป็นพวกโลหะหนักมันเจอสารออกซิไดซ์มันก็จะตกตะกอนที่ PRB ผ่านไป20 ปีเราก็ไปขุดออกน้ำใต้ดินก็จะไม่เปื้อนเลยเพราะมันจะไปติดอยู่ที่ตะแกรงตัวนี้พูดง่ายๆเหมือนเป็นตะแกรงก็เรียกว่า PRB นะเทคโนโลยี PRB เนี่ยอย่างที่ดร.ชิเล่าให้ฟังเนี่ยก็คือว่ามันดูดีมากแล้วมันใช้เงินน้อยมากแต่ปัญหาคือเราต้องเก่งเพราะว่าคนส่วนใหญ่ทำขุดแล้วน้ำไม่ได้ไหลไปทางที่ขุดแบบที่เขาทำเขาเคยเจอจ่ายเงินไปเรียบร้อยแล้วน้ำอ้อมพอขุดเสร็จแล้วน้ำอ้อมคือนึกเห็นไหมพอเราขุดดินน่ะน้ำใต้ดินก็จะเปลี่ยนทิศขุดเสร็จแล้วแพ็กอะไรลงไปเสร็จน้ำไหลไปทางอื่นแล้วแทนที่จะใช้ออกแบบมาแทนที่จะใช้ได้10 กว่าปีก็ปรากฏว่าน้ำไหลอ้อมมา2 ทางก็กลายเป็นใช้ได้แค่ไม่กี่ปีก็จมแล้วอันนี้คือเขาบอกว่าจะทำก็ต้องเก่งเรื่องโมเดลน้ำใต้ดินอันนี้เราก็บอกว่าเมื่อกี้เราก็บอกว่าเราก็มีทีมน้ำใต้ดินที่เก่งนะกรมน้ำบาดาลนะก็น่าจะทำทิศทางน้ำไหลน้ำใต้ดินได้ละเอียดหน่อยถ้าเกิดว่าเอาอีควอชันใส่ลงไปแล้วบอกว่าอาจจะต้องมี PRB ตรงนี้มันจะใช้เงินน้อยมากในการจบพื้นที่นี้ถ้าทำ PRB ได้ซึ่งทางเนี้ยก็ยินดีที่จะผมว่ายินดีที่ทำเวิร์กช็อปเพื่อมาสอนถ้าเราจะอยากรับการถ่ายทอดเทคโนโลยี PRB นะซึ่งผมรู้จักหลายอาจารย์จริงๆผมก็เรียนแต่ขอบอกเลยว่าในเมืองไทยยังไม่เห็นไซต์ไหนที่รอดก็คือมันยังไม่มีคนเก่งจริงทำให้ดูที่เป็นราชการนะเอกชนนี่อาจจะไม่มีใครอยากจะยกมือโชว์ทีนี้ก็มาถึงโซลูชันอีก2 อันที่เขาพูดเอาของง่ายก่อนคือ Plume Stop ที่ทางคุณหวังพูดนะ Plume Stop ก็คือฉีดสารเคมีลงไปฟรีซก็คือเหมือนเป็นเข้าใจว่าน่าจะเป็นสารเคมีที่พอลงไปข้างล่างปุ๊บมันจะเปลี่ยนเป็นคอนกรีตเป็นผนังใต้ดินก็คือไปฉีดลงไปหยุดเลยPlume Stop ซึ่งตัวนี้เราไม่มีในเมืองไทยเดี๋ยวอาจจะคุยถ้าเกิดใครสนใจอาจจะคุยว่าเราจะimport เทคโนโลยีนี้ได้หรือเปล่าก็ฉีดต่อไปเรื่อยๆพอออกไปทางนี้ก็ฉีดออกไปอันนี้เป็นเทคโนโลยีของคนไม่ต้องคิดเยอะคือมีตังค์แต่ว่าตังค์น้อยกว่าใช้ชีทพายเนี่ยนะเพราะชีทพายนี่คือไม่ต้องคิดอะไรเลยล้อมเลยวันแรกก็จบคือไม่ต้องคำนวณแค่รู้ว่าน้ำใต้ดินอยู่ที่ระดับไหนก็เสียบลงไปเลยเสียบชีทพายลงไปเกี่ยวกันลงไปเรื่อยๆตอกจนล้อมจบแต่คือไซส์เรานี่มันน่าจะล้อมกันได้เป็นกิโลนะผมว่าน่าจะแพงกว่าเซนทันเบลหรือจะสร้างเนี่ยอันนั้นพวกเซนทันเบลเพราะว่าเขาทำนี่ผมเดาว่าน่าจะได้หลักร้อยปลายๆนะล้านนะครับหลักร้อยล้านปลาย ถ้าจะทำทีนี้ก็มาถึงเทคโนโลยีสุดท้ายที่คุยกันซึ่งแต่ก่อนตอนเด็กๆมีแต่คนบอกว่าอย่ามาทางนี้เป็นอันขาดแต่ตอนนี้กลายเป็นตัวที่เขาเสนอคือGCW Groundwater Circulation Well ลองนึกสภาพตอนนี้น้ำใต้ดินนะมันพยายามไหลออกมาจากพื้นที่มันจะไหลตรงไหนให้เอาหลอดไปดูดตรงนั้น ดูดแล้วก็วนกลับไปปล่อยมันที่ทิศเหนือน้ำไม่ต้องคิดอะไรมากเลยหนองน้ำอยู่ทางไหนเอาปั๊มไปตั้งตรงนั้น แล้วดูดย้อนกลับไปทิ้งที่ต้นโรงงานให้น้ำมันเดินมาใหม่แต่ว่าถ้าเจอฟรีเฟสคือเจอของเสียอันตรายที่มาเป็นน้ำมันเลยทั้งก้อนก็แยกไปบำบัดซะอันนี้มีข้อดีก็คือว่าน้ำมันจะไม่มีโอกาสไหลออกนอกไซต์ก็คือว่ามันจะไปโดนปั๊มก่อนเวลาจะไหลออกข้างนอกมันก็ไปเจอปั๊มเราอ่ะดูดแล้วก็เอาไปย้อนคือเขาก็เหมือนพูดว่าถ้าคิดอะไรไม่ออกอันนี้น่าจะเป็น recommendation สำหรับกลุ่มโรงงานนะครับตอนนี้ถ้าคิดอะไรไม่ออกอ่ะทำ GCW ไปก่อนคือทำ circulation well อ่ะที่ทิศดาวเกรเดียนอ่ะไปก่อนแล้วก็สูบย้อนขึ้นไปเพื่อไม่ให้น้ำมันออกเพราะว่าตอนนี้เรากำลังทำร้ายชาวบ้านอยู่ทุกวันเพราะถ้าเราไม่ทำอะไรอ่ะมันก็ไหลออกไปถ้าถูกขึ้นมาแล้วไอ้ stabilize มาแล้วก็แทนที่แล้วน้ำมันจะดีขึ้นเรื่อยๆแล้วหาตัวเองได้ครับแต่จริงๆแล้วถ้ารู้ว่าเพื่อนเยอะมากๆอ่ะจริงๆแล้วผมแนะนำว่าทวีตเลยน่าจะดีกว่าทวีตปั๊มแอนด์ทวีตคือตอนนี้ปั๊มแอนด์ทวีตอ่ะมันเป็นเรื่องที่มันเป็นเทคโนโลยีที่กับทางทีมเนี้ยสอนผมว่าอย่าทำเป็น10 ปีแล้วแต่ตอนเนี้ยเขาพูดว่าน่าจะเป็นเทคโนโลยีที่เหมาะสำหรับคนที่เป็นอาการเฉพาะหน้าคือณตอนเนี้ยเราข้างล่างมันน่าจะไหลออกจากไซต์ทุกวินาทีคือถ้าจะหยุดวินาทีนี้เลยก็ตั้งปั๊มเลยตั้งปั๊มแล้วดึงออกมาดึงเพื่อแกล้งให้น้ำดูดให้น้ำไม่ออกแค่นั้นเองหรือคิดอะไรไม่ออกที่แม่งกลางไซส์เลยก็ได้เพราะกลางไซส์มันจะกลายเป็นแทนที่น้ำมาไหลออกจากไซส์มันกลายเป็นน้ำมาไหลเข้าไซส์น้ำจากข้างนอกทิศทางไหลเข้ามาในไซส์ก็คือปักกลางไซส์เลยแล้วสูบแล้วก็เซอร์คูลเลตอย่างเดียวเลยก็คือจะเอาไปทีจะเอาไปอะไรก็ได้แต่ทำให้ไฮดรอลิกของพื้นที่กลางไซส์เป็นไฮดรอลิกระดับต่ำกว่าข้างนอกให้ได้ก็คือทำให้เกรเดียนของพื้นที่กลางไซส์ต่ำให้ได้แล้วก็ปล่อยไม่ต้องแคร์เลยเพราะว่าในที่สุดน้ำสะอาดข้างนอกเดี๋ยวมันจะฟลัชไอตัวการปนเปื้อนย้อนคืนกลับมาในไซส์ซึ่งเราmanage ได้ไงเราถ้าทำแบบนี้เรายังมีเวลาอีกหลายปีในการ manage พื้นที่ได้อันนี้คือข้อสรุปแบบตอนนี้เลยนะบอกว่าทำให้ตั้งปั๊มทำกลางไซส์คืองบประมาณที่ได้ในปีนี้อาจจะทำที่จากที่ฟังจากมิชคือทำ GCW ไปก่อนแต่ว่าถ้าเราเก่งเดี๋ยวถ้าเกิดปีหน้าเราไม่อยากทำนี้แล้วมันเปลืองตังค์แล้วเสียเวลาเพราะเสียค่าไฟอะไรเงี้ยเราอาจจะมานั่งคุยกันเรื่องทำ PRB กันแต่ว่าอาการมันจะดีขึ้นไงเพราะมันจะได้น้ำสะอาดจากข้างนอกฟลัดคืนกลับเข้ามาข้างในเพราะฉะนั้นไอ้ตัวพลูมที่มันวิ่งไปข้างนอกแล้วมันจะวิ่ง reverse direction คือวิ่งย้อนคืนกลับมาซึ่งตัวเนี้ยมันจะซื้อเวลาให้เราได้ในการที่เราไปทำความสะอาดอะไรข้างในผมว่าถ้าเราทำ3 ปีสมมุติเล่นๆทำแคตตาล็อกข้างใน3 ปีกำจัดซอสออกไปเพราะดึงไอ้นี่เข้ามาอีก3 ปีไอ้พลูมที่มันเคยออกไปข้างนอก3 ปีมันจะ reverse ตัวเองมันก็น่าจะทำให้อาการของพื้นที่มันไม่เลยลงไปจากวันนี้แน่นอนแต่ว่าถ้าเรามัวแต่มานั่งแคตตาล็อกทีละปีกว่าจะครบ400 ล้านพลูมมันน่าจะใหญ่ขึ้นได้เป็น 10-20 เท่าซึ่งณตอนนั้นค่า remediation ข้างนอกมันจะแพงมหาศาลจนเราไม่มีตังค์จะทำได้อันนี้คือข้อสรุปนะหวังว่าทุกคนคงได้อะไรดีๆจากเมื่อกี้นี้ที่ดิสคัสกันได้โอเคครับเที่ยงพอดีออกลองจะตรงไปที่ร้านอาหารเลยใช่ไหมโอเคถ้างั้นมีใครมีคำถามเพิ่มเติมไหมครับเที่ยงพอดีโอเค I think they understand. I kind of like trying to tell them alternative groundwater circulation well permeable reactive barrier like and like a sheet pile FRP, everything. I think we probably need a matrix for comparing this kind of technology. But from the response in the class, I think probably like a groundwater circulation well probably is the easiest way to do, probably in the middle of the site, right, and then lower the hydraulic level so that the water is not flowing out.
Well, if you have need to create
Yeah, but at least we can buy time during like the waste sorting, and then we can buy time so that we can think more about if we really want to help each other during permeable electric barrier. What do we need, and then be able to buy time so that we can just so that we can basically do a demonstration on PRB, like you said, right?
I highly recommend because this is a big contaminated area. So one shot deal will never work. Never bet on one technology. There should be a combination of several. As I mentioned, it's a treatment trend, like trend. They have a different function. Therefore, for the hotspot area, for the burning area, still have tons of organic solvent. You should have a one treatment method. For the down gradient, you should have the other prevention method. For the middle, as you mentioned, maybe GCW will work, but definitely GCW will not work on the upstream, on the up gradient, because when you pumping the water, you will say, "Oh my God, there are all organic solvent, all the top, like soybean source, like the color like that, with a color like that." So, I highly recommend it should be well planned for your remediation plan. It takes time, and sometimes it's trial and error. Never get upset by that, because there will be lots of a company will come to you and claim, "Hey, Dr. Chawai, this work and that work, blah, blah, blah." But how you are going to select? As I mentioned, at least let them perform a pilot scale study. Never ever just bet on one shot. Let them try the full scale work. Thank you.
I think probably we should already conclude our training. ใครจะ ทำจุดเดียว Yeah, I think because we have like a management meeting today. So probably the Deputy Director General will meet you at the lunch, during the lunch, and also my team who go to Taiwan and cannot haven't come to see you yet. Will come to see you during our lunch. But for the one who joined this workshop, I think we have to thanks Taiwan friends so much for your effort during this 5-day training. It seems really long. There are so many activities that we have done together. And we hope that we can the information that we get will probably definitely improve our work on the wind process site, and then we hope that no matter technology, which kind of technology that we choose, we probably need also your further help on kind of like in detail of that technology. We have been talking a lot about PRB. We never actually executed. I think talking and execution is entirely different things. So we actually need your help on that. Okay. Yeah, the Deputy Director General said that he gonna wait at the restaurant already. So with that, I again thank you for your effort, and then hopefully we can do it again in the next phase. Thank you so much.